Welcome to Abolition Lessons here on the Schools Not Prisons podcast. Remember, there's no need to take an assigned seat. There will be no tests, no grades, and definitely no detention. All you need is an open mind. Founded in 2016, Schools Not Prisons is part of a larger movement to examine the history of the prison industrial complex and how oppression in all its forms has worked to criminalize young Black and brown people across the United States. I'm your host, Irene Franco Rubio, and this is the Schools Not Prisons podcast. In this episode of Abolition Lessons, we explore the abolitionist imagination by learning to practice and embrace ancestral wisdom, communal healing, and collective liberation through Crenshaw Dairy Mart's key pillars. Crenshaw Dairy Mart is guided by the following principles: to create a deep, profound feeling of connectivity to people, land, vision, and practice, to build on the functions and practices of being a community space, and through their work, generate less contact with police, less incarceration, less caging, and less trauma and more healing. Okay, well, hi, Ashley. Thank you for being here on the Schools Not Prisons podcast. We're so excited to have you, and I'm excited to get to know you as a person, a little bit more about your work, and just, excited to be in conversation with someone who's just so committed to movement and just like learning more about you. So could you share a little bit with us about yourself, how you describe yourself, your pronouns, all that sort of thing?
Yeah, thank you so much for having me. I feel really grateful to be in community with you all. My name is Ashley Blakeney. I am the executive director of Crenshaw Dairy Mart. I'm also a photographer, a crochet enthusiast, a music enthusiast, really just a lover of all things like art and process and using art to tell stories and get free. I think that's how I would describe myself. My pronouns are she, her, hers. And I'm just really grateful to be here.
Yeah, no, I love that. And that's great. I think hearing the crocheting, I definitely want to get into that. Actually, I've been like slowly trying to convince myself, so good to know that there are ways to be creative. Very cool. But no, could you tell me a little bit more about you and like how you kind of emerged as I would say a key movement builder in Los Angeles, like really creating the space and providing folks the opportunity to be creative in those ways, whether it is in an artistic, tangible way or whether it's thinking in terms of imagination and abolitionist imaginations. I would love to learn more about just how you've arrived to this work.
Yeah, thank you so much. I think my journey is an interesting one. I really never thought I'd end up in this type of position, truthfully. So I really just aspired to be an artist. In college, I studied photography and I studied creative writing and like really thought I was going to be just solely an artist. And then after I graduated, I realized that I needed to pay some bills. And so I transitioned into the world of arts administration. And I did a lot of nonprofit work, and kind of simultaneously as I was entering the workforce and like arts education nonprofits, I actually met Patrice Cullors. This was like back in 2012. And I started attending different moments with her in time, like different protests outside of the jails or different activations. And I would just always have my camera with me. And so my role in the movement very early on was just documenting and photographing and just kind of being present to bear witness and to tell the story and capture the story in that way. And so that was really my entrance into the movement, particularly in Los Angeles. And so my journey really has been focused in building up my skills in arts administration and program development. I had spent some time teaching high school for a little bit and like really dedicating my time to youth. And then I spent a few years teaching photography to kids living with cancer and like really building out arts healing curriculum around that and just really building the administrative skill set and constantly thinking about, what do artists need to thrive and how can I play a role in this? And so when the opportunity came up to be a part of Crenshaw Dairy Mart, it was kind of a no-brainer for me because it was really like the merging of what I loved and like the merging of worlds of like, all right, this is an organization that's like deeply committed to abolition, deeply committed to movement, and making sure that folks are having their needs met, and in particular artists, and in particular artists of color. And I was like, oh, I'm built for this. Like, this is like literally what I've been working for, like as an artist. And now with like this arsenal of skills, like I am essentially like made for this. And it was kind of like a dream opportunity. So I just feel really grateful to be in a position that I'm able to put all of that to use and to be able to create opportunities and really just build the structure and container for the abolitionist imagination. Like that's really what I see my role as ED, is I'm just helping to build the container for this to thrive.
I love that. No, and it sounds like in a lot of ways your entire life, yes, was built up to this like precise moment, this precise space that really, from my understanding, doesn't really exist anywhere else, or there's nothing sort of a blueprint like it that's replicating those sort of spaces and ways of thinking. So that in itself is already like congrats to you for finding the thing that aligns with you, and for like it's also like a sort of divine understanding of how people in movement come to find the things that fulfill them as a whole person, not just like, yes, in support of liberation, but then also for you yourself, how you can continue to be part of a community that's fostering your own growth at the same time. So thank you for your work. That's beautiful. And I'm wondering a little bit more about how the arts, whether it was working with youth or in schools, how these ideas of like arts healing as an avenue for eventually like long-term liberation, but arts healing as a particular avenue that's providing young people or just people new to movement with the understanding of there are different ways to approach liberation, and arts is one of those. How does that look for you?
I love that question. Wow. Okay. So I think it's all just so deeply connected. So what really brought me into this idea of arts healing was really my own personal experience in how I utilized art growing up and in school and in college. And, you know, therapy is something stigmatized in a lot of communities of color, at least previously was. I think there's some progress happening. And so I really just deeply believe that art has always been an outlet, particularly for folks of color, to really kind of get a deeper understanding of themselves and their communities. And, you know, look at the birth of hip hop, right? Like it's all of it is interconnected, but it to me has always been some form of like healing and therapy. And so how that showed up for me was always the dark room, and like how I related to the dark room in photography, and how that was my place of processing and understanding and like really coming to terms with that. And so I learned about the field of arts therapy, realized I didn't want to pay to go to grad school. And then I learned about arts healing and like arts healing facilitation and how it has similar principles, but I don't need to take out more student loans. And so I did a certification program through UCLA, and it was this really beautiful process of, you know, you're guiding folks in this process of creating art, but then asking just really important questions around the process and just providing space for them to talk through it. And so the way that really showed up in my work is, you know, when I taught high school, I taught at a charter school that was, you know, very robotic, very much like operated on a carceral system. The students didn't really have a chance to really build their own identities. And so I really leaned on those arts healing facilitation skills and would host like lunchtime poetry sessions. And I would have kids come to my class, and I would put on a soundtrack, and I would give them a prompt, and it would be something to like address, you know, something that had just happened in their life or something that was feeling really important for them to talk about, and just give them the space to write and create freely. And then we would talk about it. And again, it was just setting that container. And then similarly with the photography program I built, you know, in that organization, in our like beginners classes, we don't talk about cancer. So we teach kids photography as a distraction from cancer, but not to talk about it. And then as I got to know a lot of the older students, I was like, you know, the teens are ready to talk about it. Like they want to talk about this process. And so the curriculum there that I built out was really focusing in on, you know, what does this mean? Like, what are you capturing in your photographs? And like, what is the story that you want to tell, so that other folks are not telling the story for you? Like, we don't want to assume we know about your journey, like this is your chance to tell it. And so really just kind of like probing those questions. And so I feel like that process, we see it a lot in the way that arts connects with liberation and the way that art connects with abolition is, you know, folks are more likely to engage with visual media or music or different forms of content than they are to read a book, like especially now in like a social media kind of world. And we see that a lot in different film projects and photography, and just really encouraging and opening up and providing space to like utilize and encourage art making as a way of like sharing our journey essentially. And just just really wanting to think about, you know, like music videos are kind of a lost art, but like look at how incredible music videos are as a genre, and like as a way for us to see journey and imagination and just like the different avenues that they connect to us and the different ways of getting free. Or I always refer to Laura Mavula's Green Garden video from like a decade ago, but I'm like, that was just such an incredible depiction of like, look at Black folks getting free, you know. And it's like you have these different opportunities to see this in art, and I think sometimes people either miss the connection or don't realize how important art is to make the connection of like, we have to visualize our liberation, we have to visualize our freedom, we have to visualize abolition, and like, let's as artists lean into that and create those opportunities.
Wow. No, I love that. That's the whole episode. That's all we need to hear. No, I love that you're bringing us through the process of like starting with the students as providing the literal container of space. I think in thinking about this episode, I was trying to think back, like, as a young person, how did I feel about being creative? And I think for many, we're limited and denied the opportunity to allow free thinking to happen, right? Our days in terms of schooling is, these are the subjects and these are the things and this is the accepted curriculum, and like, this too sloppy, that's too messy, that's too much, you know, that kind of thing. And I think you being in a space as an educator, centering arts as an avenue is, yes, giving young people the chance to like be children and having the chance to just learn, but then also, you know, getting into this idea of like music videos and other forms of visual media as ways to fully visualize and almost like tangibly hold whatever this idea is, however one wants to approach it. There's like different mediums and ways of doing so, but I really love that you're bringing it back to like, at its core, we need something to be able to basically put into practice whatever it is that we're thinking, and we don't know how to visualize it, right? So thanks for that. I think young people, and we still don't think about this often today, like students in schools are still constantly being denied the opportunity to be creative people, you know? So I'm wondering for you, knowing that, how did you start to like use this as, this is the avenue that I'm honing in on, and this is the avenue that liberation is going to be achieved for the work that you're doing? How did that start to show up now getting into your work at CDM or Crenshaw Dairy Mart, which we will ask in a second?
How did I hone in on it? Wow. I think I just like fell in love with witnessing and watching people discover their creative selves and to like lean into it. And constantly it was a reminder for me of like, anything that I can do to encourage this, I will do. And, you know, even whether it's like back with the students, like, you know, I was like not the most liked teacher by like the administration there, but the kids felt free. And I'm like, great. Like, they called my classroom the sanctuary. And I'm like, if that is what you need, I'm going to do everything in my power to make sure that this is a protected space for you. And same thing with like, as I kind of went on in my career after that, and just thinking about just really like the I don't want to say gratification, but really just like, I guess the healing process that it gave me to see the power of building a container for folks to just be their freest and creative selves. And I think there's that permission that's missing sometimes, of being able to like really lean into that imagination and like really lean into the space and the time to just like take care of that part of us. And so I just feel like that's my job. It's
Yeah.
like my job is to give that space, give that time. Oh, you need a prompt? Here's a prompt. Like, oh, you want to just come and journal? Okay, like here's an idea for that. Like I think I just like to be able to open up that door a little bit. And also pull like reference materials and like, even some of like the hardest folks I know that are like not down to be creative. Like my like favorite anecdote is I'm like look at how much people in hip hop talk about space. Like look at all the rappers that are talking about space and how there's like this alternate universe and all this. And I'm like, that's them getting free. Like that's them literally thinking about like what is our freest selves? Like how like we deserve a world that's so much better than the world that we're living in. And like this is our escapism. So like I'm always like trying to find those through lines and being able to pull like the different reference materials or like the different pieces of inspiration and just offer the container in the space, and you got it from there.
Yeah, giving the people the chance to decide how they want to move with it and really take it in each in their own way, right? It's not gonna show up for the same for every person. No one has the same imagination, and
That's
how can
right.
like creativity really be fostered? I think for Crenshaw Dairy Mart in particular, which now I'm excited to hear more about it. How does all of this, your experiences now, your work as a movement builder, start to show up at Crenshaw Dairy Mart? And what is it precisely for folks who don't know?
Yeah, so Crenshaw Dairy Mart is magical. We are an artist collective and an art gallery in Inglewood. So we're like right on the intersection of Crenshaw and Manchester. And we're really just a space that is dedicated to art and abolition and all of the intersections that come with that. So we're really focused on our three pillars being ancestry, healing, and abolition, and all of the different programs and opportunities and exhibitions, all the things that we offer just ties directly into that. And so how I came into Crenshaw Dairy Mart, or CDM, so Crenshaw Dairy Mart opened literally 2 weeks before the pandemic. Was when they opened their first exhibition, and then really had to kind of pivot like most folks and understand and think about, what is our next opportunity, what is our next offering, and what are we going to do? And so they decided and created this really beautiful project called an Abolitionist pod, which is really like this gorgeous geodesic dome garden, and it holds like 1,000 plants, and it was really inspired by mutual aid efforts and with abolition in mind and providing care and like in response to COVID-19. And at the time it was just the three co-founders. It was Noe Olivas, Ali Reza Deriz, and Patrice Cullors. And they received an opportunity to build this pod, and they needed support. And so at that time, I was kind of in transition and figuring out what my next move was going to be. And Patrice called me and was like, hey, we need some support. Can you come and help us build this pod? And I'm like, yeah, sure. Like I can project manage. So I did, and we built the pod in like 3 months. And then as that project came to a close, they saw what I had to offer and the approach that I took to the work, and very lovingly asked me to stay and be their boss and to continue to build out the container. So that's really what the last 3 years have been, or 4 now, has really been, again, building the container for all of the work that we're doing and making sure that we have, the proper infrastructure to take care of our people, with our pillars in mind.
And I love the 3 pillars, by the way. I've been thinking about it all week. I think ancestry is one, right? Healing and abolition. But all these things together are supposed to emulate what the abolitionist world, abolition imagination can be. Can you describe a little bit like what those 3 pillars mean to you and how they kind of show up?
Yeah. So if I can tie what they mean to me and our work together, I think ancestry feels really prevalent in thinking about where we fit as an organization in just like the legacy of work in Los Angeles, right? So there's kind of like 2 different angles of that. You can look at, our legacy within the Black arts movement, and there's, this really beautiful history of, gallerists, organizers, artists, like the multi-hyphenates that have created these really beautiful spaces and really shifted art conversations in Los Angeles. Like we look at St. Elmo Village a lot for inspiration there. And then there's also this really gorgeous legacy of the overlap of artists and organizers and abolitionists who have really done the work to, you know, whether it was Measure R or Measure J, or like really change policy in Los Angeles and incorporate art in that process. And so we're kind of like the child of those two different arms of the legacy in that way. So we think about ancestry in that regard, like who were the folks that we are coming after as a fairly new organization, but also like the ancestry on a personal level too of, you know, a lot of our folks in our lives have like deeply informed our personal art practices. Or in my case, you know, my first camera was given to me from my great uncle Reggie, who was an artist and a Tuskegee Airman and just like this crazy Renaissance man, and like really birthed and inspired like what my love is of art. And so I like carry him with me through all of like the artwork that I do and the way that I move through this space. And then if you look at healing, I mean, it's healing, you know, it's like a necessity. It's what we need. It is a cornerstone in relationship to abolition and the bridge between ancestry and abolition as well. And think, you know, I think a lot about how we are healing a lot of our relationships, familial and community wise, whether it's through with folks that have been through the carceral system or, you know, folks who have been oppressed by these harmful systems. And we're also like really centering care in all of our practices and healing ourselves and each other through our work and through our practice. And so, you know, our team does a collective somatics practice together, and it's something that we've been training in, and it's something that is incorporated in our meetings and in our relationships with each other, and just really focusing in on we have to be our best selves and we have to be able to show up for each other and continue to do the beautiful work that we're doing and move from like as healed of a place as possible. And then abolition, you know, we look at it also as a two-pronged thing of, you know, we're dismantling and disrupting and tearing down harmful systems and carceral systems and systems that have really like oppressed us and harmed us, and then tapping into our imagination to build the world that we want to see. And I always say that I think artists should be at the forefront of that. Like this is what we do. Artists use our imagination all the time, and it just completely makes sense to be trying to really impact the conversation in that way. And so, yeah, it shows up in our daily practices and just our relationships with each other and the way that we, you know, engage with each other and handle conflict and resolution, and how we're, you know, pushing conversations with our partners and, you know, anybody that works with us. It's like, great, let's talk about abolition, like introduce them to it, really dive into it with them. And it just is really just it's like a medicine. It's a just ingrained practice for us.
Yeah. And what are some of the ways that CDM goes about, whether it's providing partners or members or just organizers, a better understanding of imagining the abolitionist world itself? Like, I think it's hard oftentimes for just either movement builders or rather just everyday people trying to understand and grasp this concept. And I think, like, as we've already described, because it's not like a thing we can grab, how does CDM go about providing the space for that to happen? And whether it's through events or programming, what are some key ways that you've identified?
Yeah, so we find and intentionally place it deep in our programs and like at the core of it. And so what that might look like, we had a fellowship last year, was our inaugural fellowship, and it was the Crenshaw Dairy Mart Fellowship for Abolition and the Advancement of the Creative Economy. It's very long, shortened to CDM FACE. But our pillars and our approach to that fellowship were very intentional, because we were thinking about ensuring that our artists' needs were met, right? Which to me is a core staple of abolition, is like, we want basic needs met. That looks different in every scenario, but in this particular scenario, because we're also disruptors within the art world, it was very important to us that our fellows made a living wage. So we were asking them for a year of their time to be in curriculum with us. And so we provided $100,000 stipends, and we provided health insurance, which artists don't have access to. And then a really beautiful and thoughtful curriculum that was really like training a politicized artist, and like really ensuring that abolition was really steeped into the lessons that they were receiving, both to really stand up to like an MFA level curriculum, but also like, what is your role as an abolitionist and as an artist, and how can you carry this with you through your like artistic career? So it's embedded in that way. With our abolitionist pod, that one's been pretty fun because we are building them in places throughout the county, and it's been really interesting because we're really kind of changing, I don't want to say we're changing policy, but we're enforcing the use of abolition in everyday conversation. And so in the places that we are building these abolitionist pods, in our MOUs, it's like you must refer to this as an abolitionist pod. And this is a place of rest. This is a place of respite. Like, we want folks to be able to come in and access these plants and like not be met with security or questions. When we built the first one, we did that in partnership with the Mocha Geffen. And had to have a lot of conversations around security and people over property, and like, this is what it means for us to be an abolitionist. And like, you all engage with LAPD. We don't want LAPD to have any presence around this pod. Like, we will bring in our own abolitionist like security firm, and this sculpture is not more important to us than like the lives of an unhoused person who may be coming here to take a nap, or maybe coming here to grab some fruit. Like, this is not, that is our priority is the person, and not this the artwork. And so it's really having deep conversations like that, and just really challenging folks in their beliefs and what they assume to be true about safety, or assume to be true about what folks need, and also just really holding folks accountable. We've, in the art space, we've been approached in different ways by different art institutions, and really calling folks in and inviting them to talk to us more, or ask, why aren't more Black art spaces a part of this particular endeavor or offering, or why aren't you including more artists in this, and just really having the courageous conversations. So it shows up a lot for us just in our everyday work.
Well, going a little bit back. Oh yeah, go ahead. Yeah, the abolitionist pods. Yeah. Sorry. So going a little bit back to the abolitionist pod.
Sure.
So could you remind us as a concept, what does it embody, and what does it represent, and what does it actually look like? I know we're gonna also show, but what does that look like?
Yeah, of course. So the Abolitionist Pod was really inspired by work by Buckminster Fuller and June Jordan, and these kind of public sculptures that hold plants and food. And so the way that it was informed to us at the Dairy Mart was, it was really informed by the mutual aid efforts that the co-founders were witnessing during the pandemic. And so in 2020, after CDM had to shut down, they participated in like two really beautiful mutual aid efforts. One was with Lauren Halsey's Some of Everything, where they were packing and giving away produce food boxes. And CDM contributed art kits to put in the food boxes to give to families, and so that their children and youth and even adults could have something artistic to do in the pandemic. And then similarly, two local organizers, Juice Wood and Vern Yancey, approached the co-founders and asked if CDM would house the Inglewood Community Fridge. And so it was home to the Inglewood Community Fridge for the bulk of 2020. And so in seeing the way that these efforts were being done, a lot of that really informed the birth of the Abolitionist Pod. And so it was really thinking about, how can we incorporate abolition and art and architecture and sacred geometry and, the mutual aid efforts. How do we combine this into one project? And then at its full potential, it holds these, there's these different kind of hanging systems that hold up to about 1,000 plants. And we sourced all of the plants from local Black farmers and local organizations. And we worked with like a master gardener to really kind of curate the plants that would be within the pods. And then we basically create an entire ecosystem that surrounds each pod. And so aside from the Black farmers, we would tap on local community organizations to program the pod. And it's essentially kind of curated based on the location where the pod is installed. And so some folks we've worked with are Dignity and Power Now, Social Justice Learning Institute, Huma House. And so we really are tapping on folks within our community that maybe can teach, job skills or teach how to take these herbs and make teas from it, really just kind of spanning the gamut of what could be possible. But then also really encouraging folks to utilize the pod as a place of rest, and to, maybe you just want to sit and hang out there. Or maybe you want to like sit there and watch the sunset, or maybe you want to take a nap. Somebody literally took a nap in the very first pod that we built at the Mocha, and it was beautiful. It's like this is what we want. We just want a place of safety and again, just a container of care. And that's a lot of how we look at that.
Yeah. No, I love the idea of the abolitionist pod. I remember in coming across it, I was like, this is precisely the visual image, the physical structure of a thing. Like surrounded by plants and nature in a city that doesn't have access to those things. I feel like it's embodying what it is that we should be providing communities everywhere. But at its core, I think what stood out to me about it the most is that now that you're sharing it it's not so much of the property itself. It's more about what is it that it brings to community, or how do folks in community engage with it? What does it give to members, but also what do members give to it at the same time? Like it's kind of this cycle of kind of the ancestral wisdom here, right? Of like, what is it that is the earth and how are we giving to it in the same way it gives to us? And I think in that way, it's just reminding me like these are the sort of guiding principles that bring us back down to like beyond current structures and systems. Like at its core, it is the ways in which we're engaging as a community in fostering the space for sort of whether it's the planting of things or the resting. I think it's just a beautiful thing. So thank you for describing it. It's something that I'm excited to see, but also I think it needs to be sort of replicated in other communities, and I'm excited to hear that it's something that it's going to be placed in different areas in LA County.
That's the vision.
Okay.
That's the vision, is that we want it to be in places that are accessible where folks need it most. But I love that you touched on the idea of like, what does the community give to it? Because I think that was something really beautiful that we witnessed that we didn't really anticipate when we built the first one, because that location was near Little Tokyo. And Ali Reza, one of our co-founders, he was really committed to being at the pod almost like all day, every day. And there was this beautiful process that was happening where folks were taking plants as they were invited to, and then they would like come back and they would bring more plants, or they would like do a trade, or they would replace it. And it was just like this really beautiful image of folks pouring back into it, or like bringing him an offering, or like building relationships in that way. And it's like, that's exactly right. Like that's exactly how it should be. And that's so much of what I think our values really lend themselves to, is like these just deep, meaningful, beautiful relationships. And it's like not just within ourselves, but within our larger community and just within the work. And Noe, our other co-founder, he tends to our facilities, and he's got a Tech Nanhan compost, and he's like really just like laying prayers over it and giving it all this love, and like thinking a lot about this like the life cycle, and just we're pouring back into like the compost is really thriving with plants from the original pod that we built in like 2021, and it's like this really beautiful offering of just care that's just like constantly recycled.
And this idea of community care seems to be embedded in all facets of what Crenshaw Dairy Mart is doing, whether it's from the pod, or I think going back to the fellowship as well, providing artists with the stipends and ability to live, just basic needs that everyone should be providing. But altogether, I think CDM is in a lot of ways a blueprint, but also embodying what it means to center these things and still be able to thrive as a space. And I think I'm wondering, is that something that you have come to really own in your own leadership too, as someone who's been in movement as an artist and has now emerged in leadership?
Mm-hmm.
How do you start to practice your leadership with these values and continue to push CDM in the direction that, you've been grounded by?
Yeah. Wow. Thank you for that question. It's a process. It's a process. I think, I tell people a lot, especially as I've come from nonprofit and, charter school, just a variety of backgrounds, that this space is the first time I've worked anywhere or been a part of anything where the founders are deeply committed to and embodying all of our values. And I think that that's what makes it so easy for us to embody them as an organization. And I think I had a lot of unlearning to do in becoming a leader and a leader of this space, because I just knew what leaders looked like in the past that I didn't want to replicate. Mm-hmm. And even in thinking about how I show up for the team and the systems that we put in place, and we live in LA, and historically arts workers in LA are deeply underpaid, mm-hmm. Both arts workers and nonprofit workers, which we kind of fall in that mix.
Same category.
Yeah. And I was like, I don't want that, I don't want folks to feel like they can't afford to live mm-hmm. here, and that they're working all this time and they don't have their basic needs met, but all we're talking about is meeting folks' basic needs, and so, that was something I really wanted to implement. And similarly, it's like, the somatics practice I talked about, like making sure we have space in the budget to really invest and take care of our team. Like, I really had to do a lot of unlearning and kind of retraining in abolitionist values, and like being able to really think about like, how does it show up in the workplace? And like one thing I always say, and like, if you ever email us, you'll probably get a message that's like, we're juggling a lot, we'll get back to you like when we get to you, and it's like there's this idea of this like constant urgency that's like tied to capitalism and, again, nonprofit work, and everything is so important. And it's like, it's not, though. Mm-hmm. Like, we can't take on everybody's urgency because there are other really important things that have to happen. And so it's really just trying to embody these pieces, or as Noé says, like he's always talking about low and slow, and like, just breathe a little bit. So I really feel like I'm on a journey myself in figuring out how to best embody our values and how to lead an abolitionist space. And, we all have to, unfortunately, like thrive and survive under capitalism, but how can we do it in the most caring way, and in a way that is still feeding us and doesn't feel like we're just being lost in this system? Mm-hmm. And I think it similarly comes with its challenges, because there's also the idea of like sustainability and how do we ensure that we can do this work for a long time? And so I think there's just a lot of just process that's tied into that. And I'm constantly learning and just constantly trying to be in conversation with folks. And, it's also really interesting too, because I'm very much an introvert. And so it's like, it's also been like that kind of push on like a personal level of like, yeah, I got to go talk to people. Yeah, and like, yeah. I got to show up, and, I got to like take off my little like onesie jumpsuits and like maybe put something else on, or not, like, or I'm just going to show up as I am, like there's always that conversation that's happening.
Yeah, no, I love that you're sharing this, and I appreciate it. Also, I think coming up as the sort of like new era of mm-hmm. or new generation of movement builders, and learning from people like Patrice, or mm-hmm. like the work that we do at Revolve, it's giving us the chance to really hone in on a leadership that we really didn't consider before, or didn't know that we would kind of be in these positions now.
Yeah.
And so I think it's just something that I also reflect on, and how are we evolving and pushing a movement forward in a way that's allowing us to like still learn, because we are still learning. Like, mm-hmm. I don't know all the things, you don't know all the things, mm-hmm. but we're like figuring out what are these ideas, what is this imagination, like how can we try to understand it together, and understanding that we're all sort of at different levels of consciousness, but also just like on a consistent journey to get to this similar destination.
Yeah.
So I just appreciate this idea of like young people in movements, having some grace for knowing that we don't know all the things. Absolutely. And we don't know how to do them all, or can't respond right away, So going back to this idea of really understanding and making abolition tangible.
Mm-hmm.
What does the abolitionist imagination look like? What is it? How does it show up for different people, at least in the ways you've come to find it and understand it as CDM?
Yeah. Wow. I don't think there's a clear-cut answer to that, because I really think it leans on the imagination of abolitionists,
Mm-hmm.
right? And I think that is what is so unique about individuals and artists, is that no two imaginations look the same.
Mm-hmm.
But I do think it involves deep collaboration, and the reminder that things should not happen in silos, nor should they happen independently. And so, this is why we talk a lot about economies of care, or creating different economies for each of our different projects. And so most things that we do, at least at CDM, there's a bunch of folks working on it, whether they're staff members at CDM or community partners, or we just did this huge film festival that was really a response to like community folks asking us to do something like that. And we tapped on an incredible event planner who's based in Inglewood. And then, I hit up some of my friends that are really like pushing conversations in the film industry to be a part of building that out. Like, it's really thinking about collaboration and thinking about how we build something together as a collective. And I think it just involves dreaming as big as possible and then figuring it out. So like we laugh a lot as a team, because it's like, if you put us in a room together, we're going to throw something at the wall, and more than likely it's going to stick. And then we have to kind of backtrack and be like, all right, well, how are we going to do that? And then we figure out how to do it. And if we don't know how to do it, we call the people who do know how to do it. And, and so I think really abolitionist imagination is just thinking about, what is the world that we want to live in? What does it look like for us? And how can we get there? And how can we prototype these different avenues of how to get there? And maybe we're going to fail, and that's fine. And like, that's something that like we're constantly adapting to. And like, even me as a leader, because, a lot of times Black folks aren't given permission to fail. So that's like a new experiment and really trying to explore that and just see what happens. But we're not going to build that world without trying. We're not going to build that world without prototyping. And so, that's why a lot of the things that we do, you'll see, we'll call it a prototype. And it just is because we're just trying it out, and we're doing it with support and with care and with like a team. And luckily, most of the things have been beautiful and successful, and we just keep going.
Yeah. And I think a big reason for them being beautiful and successful is because you've grounded collaboration as a key component to it all. And I really love that you're saying that, because one sort of key theme that I try to bring back into each episode is that these ideas of organizing and movement silos, as I've sort of started to define them, and instead build intersectional cross-cultural movements that like are emerging all areas of interest, whether it's art or music or community or whatever it may be, but starting to see that like this world we're talking about is not just for some of us, it's supposed to be for all of us. That's and right. It requires like everyone's input, right? And it requires like different ways of thinking, that I may think a certain way about something, but you may think a different way about it. So like, how do we get to a consensus and like actually build that? So I love that you're already demonstrating within your own team, like how together thinking through things that may not be perfect in thought or in practice, but then sort of executing it anyway with the hopes that like we may mess up and we may fail. And like, I think we get questions all the time about like, well, what does the world without police really look like? Like, well, we won't know until we do it.
Exactly.
Right? Like,
exactly.
We're not going to really know, but we have to acknowledge that we don't want to be in a world where we're not trying and where we're allowing people to constantly die, right? Yeah. At the expense of being fearful of making mistakes, you know? So I think that in itself is like, it's sort of transcending, whether it's at CDM as a physical space or teaching folks in movement how to think about it generally. So no, I really appreciate that. Yeah. And I guess a sort of last remark for you is hearing from your own take what being an abolitionist means to you, how you've come to embody it, perhaps even at a time when you didn't know what it was, but you eventually realized, and now you're in this position where you're really providing the space and curriculum for folks to understand it too. So what does being an abolitionist look like and mean to you?
I think for me, being an abolitionist is about taking risks. In my particular position, it's about taking creative risks, and really trying to get us there, trying to get us to that new world, that new imagination, the new vision for us where, yes, all of our needs are met, all of our folks are taken care of. We're in right relationship with each other, and we're in, healing processes together, and we're showing up for the most vulnerable, and we're doing all the things, and not giving energy and visibility to the folks and the systems and the spaces that are telling us that we don't deserve these things or that we shouldn't have these things. And so I'm just constantly thinking creatively about how can we get there, and how do we do it in a way that ensures that we have longevity and care and fulfilling lives and beautiful communities to accompany us on this journey.
And this will be my last one. But I wonder, from you now being around so many folks who are inviting of the opportunity to think so freely, what does your abolitionist world look like?
Oh man.
I know it's the ultimate question.
It is the most all right, I'm gonna be a nerd for a second.
No, please.
I grew up with an immense love of fairies.
Yeah.
And I feel like that's the vision I have when I think about abolition and freedom, is just literally people of color frolicking in the forest, which is rare as hell. Like that. What? But I literally just want us to be free enough where we feel like we can frolic, we can dance, we can just be as joyful and powerful and creative and just in celebration. That to me is what it looks like. I just see us all hanging out in the forest, kicking it and partying. Not to oversimplify, but I'm that to me is what I think about when I think about liberation.
No, that's beautiful. And I could totally visualize it when you were describing. I was I could totally see that. No, that's beautiful. Thanks for sharing. Yeah. Thank you for this wonderful conversation. I feel like it gave us so much more context to really get folks to start to embrace these ideas in a lot more of a inviting and sort of collective way. So thank you for being here.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah. So as I've mentioned on this podcast before, my work is guided by, in many ways, my parents and their experiences as Latinx people, as immigrants coming to the United States, and has really formed my positionality, way of thinking, and how I show up in the world. And for many children of immigrants, our parents came to the U.S. with an idea of a dream, of a better life, of a world that didn't exist for them, and trying to create the circumstances to attain it. And in this way, the imagination for myself started to emerge as knowing that there's a possibility of creating the world that we want, even if it doesn't exist here. It could exist somewhere. And this abolitionist world is a place that could allow these ways of thinking to thrive. In my imagination, an abolitionist world is one where everyone gets a chance to thrive. It's people laughing, families that are together, communities at the park, singing songs, sharing, just being in a collective space that allows everyone to feel happy and joyous and without fear or worry, without the need to work, without feeling consumed by systems, and instead fostering a collective space where everyone gets a chance to be happy, everyone gets a chance to rest, to live freely. That's what an abolitionist world looks like to me.